Imagine waking up one morning to find out that the Supreme Court has issued two decisions so massive, so historically unusual that they could reshape America's political future, the country's immigration system, and even the next several generations. And just when it seems like things can't get any more intense, Marjorie Taylor Greene unleashes a political shocker. A leaked phone call surfaces about the Epstein files involving Donald Trump, headlines explode, commentators scramble for explanations, and millions of Americans are left trying to sort out what's fact, what's exaggeration, and what these twists actually mean for the country they care about. Today, we're breaking everything down calmly, clearly, and honestly. By the end, you'll see why historians may look back at this week as a major turning point in American history, and why the media is working overtime to shape the story before the public understands what truly happened. Let's begin with the ruling that immediately rattled Washington. The Supreme Court just released a decision on a Texas redistricting case. At first glance, it may sound like routine legal business, but that would be a huge mistake. This ruling has the power to reshape the political balance in Congress for the next decade or even longer. Here's the core of it. Like every state, Texas draws congressional district maps. These maps decide which communities vote together and ultimately determine who represents them in Washington. When Texas updated its maps a few years ago, critics argued the new lines heavily favored Republicans, possibly flipping around 5 Democratic districts into Republican ones. A lower federal court reviewed the maps and said, "Hold on, these maps appear to rely on racial gerrymandering. You're dividing voters by race, not just political preference." That's serious because while partisan gerrymandering drawing maps to help your political party is legal and practiced by both sides, using race as a primary factor is unconstitutional. So the lower court struck down the maps. Texas then took the issue to the Supreme Court, and here's where everything changes. The conservative majority on the Supreme Court reversed that lower court ruling. They argued that the judges did not show enough respect for the Texas legislative intentions. In plain terms, the Supreme Court said lawmakers should be assumed to be acting in good faith unless there is strong proof of intentional discrimination. The justices also clarified that maps with racial effects are not automatically unconstitutional. What matters is whether racial discrimination was the intended goal, not just the outcome. Why does this matter nationwide? Because the ruling effectively signals to every Republican-controlled state that if they redraw their congressional districts to strengthen partisan advantage, the Supreme Court is likely to allow it as long as officials say their motive is political rather than racial. And since partisan gerrymandering has always been legal, this changes the strategic landscape dramatically. For decades, Republicans faced more legal challenges because attempts to weaken Democratic voting power could be reframed as racial discrimination, since many black voters support Democrats. Meanwhile, Democratic-led states could often gerrymander aggressively without facing the same level of scrutiny. This new Supreme Court standard shifts that balance. It puts more weight on lawmakers' stated intent instead of statistical voting patterns. So what does this mean in practical terms? Analysts predict that heading into the next nationwide redistricting cycle after the next census, Republican legislatures might be able to redraw enough districts to shift 20 to 40 House seats. That would be a major change, possibly the difference between a divided House and a long-lasting majority. But there's an even deeper layer. The Supreme Court is also reviewing a major Voting Rights Act case. The Voting Rights Act has long allowed challenges to maps that produce discriminatory effects. Even when discriminatory intent can't be proven, this Texas decision suggests the court might move toward a standard that prioritizes proven intent over statistical results. If that becomes the rule, the entire redistricting system in America could change for decades. Now, before people jump to conclusions, it's important to understand what the court is actually doing. They're not creating new law. They're reinterpreting how existing law should be applied. Partisan gerrymandering has always been legal. The debate has only been over where the limits should be. The court is simply saying that the limits should be based on clearer, more predictable standards instead of relying on statistical after-the-fact arguments. In a strange way, this ruling may bring more clarity and honesty to a process that has always been deeply political. But if you thought that decision was historic, the Second Supreme Court move might redefine who counts as an American citizen. On the very same day, the court announced it will hear arguments on President Trump's executive order concerning birthright citizenship. This issue goes to the heart of American identity and has been simmering for decades. Here's the background. After the Civil War, the United States adopted the 14th Amendment. It states that anyone born on U.S. soil becomes an American citizen. The main goal was to ensure formerly enslaved people and their children were recognized as full citizens, overturning the old Dred Scott ruling. For over 150 years, the 14th Amendment has been interpreted to mean that almost anyone born in the United States, regardless of their parents' legal status, is automatically a U.S. citizen. This is known as birthright citizenship, or in Latin just soli, meaning right of the soil. President Trump issued an executive order directly challenging the long-standing interpretation of birthright citizenship. His order argued that children born in the United States to parents who entered the country illegally or who are here on temporary visas should not automatically be considered U.S. citizens, as expected. This immediately triggered a political firestorm. Legal experts on the left insisted the order was plainly unconstitutional, claiming the 14th Amendment's wording is unmistakably clear and cannot be changed by a president. They pointed to a Supreme Court ruling from the late 1800s that many believe settled the issue once and for all. But here's what surprised almost everyone. The Supreme Court didn't reject the case outright. They didn't say, "This is obviously unconstitutional, there's nothing to debate." Instead, they agreed to hear full arguments. That alone is a major signal. It means at least 4 justices, the minimum required to take a case, think the legal question is serious enough to examine. So what exactly is the argument? Trump's lawyers focus on the specific language in the 14th Amendment. It doesn't simply say all persons born in the United States, it says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. That final phrase carries major legal weight. The administration argues it implies a deeper form of legal responsibility or long-term allegiance to the United States. They note that children of foreign diplomats do not receive automatic citizenship even if they are born on U.S. soil, because diplomats are not fully under U.S. jurisdiction due to diplomatic immunity. Trump's legal team goes even further. They point to the 1898 case Wong Kim Ark and argue that the ruling is often misunderstood. According to their interpretation, the decision confirmed citizenship only for children born to parents who had established permanent domicile, lasting home, and long-term legal presence in the United States. The term domicile appears repeatedly in that ruling. It refers to people who have a settled residence and an intention to remain in the country. That is very different from someone who entered the country illegally just weeks ago or someone staying on a temporary visa that will soon expire. So is this argument strong? The answer is complicated. Many legal scholars maintain that birthright citizenship has always been understood as nearly universal with very limited exceptions. But others argue that the 14th Amendment has been interpreted more broadly than its authors intended, and that Wong Kim Ark may not actually guarantee citizenship for every child born on U.S. soil. And here's something that should make everyone pause. Even analysts on networks that rarely support Trump have admitted that his legal team has a stronger case than many expected. When commentators say, they might not win, but this argument is legitimate, it means this isn't a pointless lawsuit. The Supreme Court is preparing to seriously grapple with the issue. Why is this happening in 2025? One major reason is the enormous rise in illegal immigration over the past several years. Estimates suggest that somewhere between 15 and 30 million people entered the country illegally during the previous administration. Many of them had children after arriving. Under the current interpretation of the 14th Amendment, all of those children are American citizens. That brings massive real-world consequences. influencing everything from social services to future voting eligibility to long-term immigration policy. But there's a deeper shift driving this moment. Americans are beginning to confront fundamental questions about national sovereignty and what it truly means to be a citizen. For generations, U.S. citizenship has been relatively easy to obtain if someone could physically reach American soil and give birth. Globally, that approach is extremely rare. Canada offers similar automatic citizenship. A few other countries in the Western Hemisphere do as well. But most nations across Europe, Asia, and Africa require at least one parent to be a citizen or legal resident. So the real question before the Supreme Court is this: does the Constitution mandate universal birthright citizenship? Or does it allow the government to adopt a more specific standard based on the legal status and long-term intentions of the parents? And if the court rules that the government has flexibility, it would mark one of the biggest changes to U.S. immigration policy in modern history. Consider what that shift would mean in practice. Right now, if someone enters the country illegally and gives birth, the child becomes a U.S. citizen. That child qualifies for public education, government benefits, and eventually, even as an adult, may sponsor relatives for legal immigration. It creates a long chain of legal consequences that begins with an illegal entry. If the court upholds Trump's executive order or simply says the issue is more nuanced than previously believed, it could remove a major incentive for illegal immigration. Families would no longer be able to secure citizenship for their children merely by crossing the border. Some people may feel this approach is harsh because it affects children who had no control over their circumstances. That emotional reaction is understandable, but laws are based on principles, not emotions. The principle at stake is whether a nation has the authority to define its own citizenship rules, something every country throughout history has taken as a basic right. The real question is whether our Constitution prevents the United States from making reasonable distinctions based on legal status. And what makes this moment even more important is the growing connection between birthright, citizenship, and the broader immigration system. For decades, America's immigration system has been described as broken by leaders from both political parties. Millions of people who apply to immigrate legally wait in line for years, sometimes even decades. At the same time, millions of others have entered the country illegally and, through different pathways including giving birth in the U.S., have managed to remain. This creates a clear moral imbalance. It penalizes people who respect the rules and seems to reward people who bypass them. Over the years, that kind of system weakens public trust and undermines respect for the law itself. The Supreme Court's decision to take this case suggests the justices recognize we've reached a critical moment. Whether they end up supporting Trump's order or rejecting it, the fact that they're reopening long-standing assumptions shows the legal and political landscape is shifting beneath our feet. And here's my personal prediction. For whatever it's worth, I expect this to be a 5-4 ruling. I believe the court may say that birthright citizenship isn't completely unlimited and that it requires at least one parent to hold some form of lawful, permanent status. Of course, I could be wrong. No one knows for certain until the final decision is announced. But all the early signals suggest the court is preparing to issue a major constitutional clarification. Now, let's move to something that unfolded while the entire country was locked in on these Supreme Court developments, something extremely explosive that you might have missed. Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of Donald Trump's strongest allies in Congress for years, went on 60 Minutes and revealed details from a private phone call she had with the former president. And the topic of that call? The Epstein files. Before we break that down, it's important to understand the background. Jeffrey Epstein was a wealthy financier who died in federal custody several years ago while facing charges related to trafficking and abuse. His case included allegations linking him to influential and powerful people across politics, business, entertainment, and other industries. After his death, public pressure for full transparency only grew, with many demanding to know precisely who Epstein had connections to and what the authorities uncovered. Earlier this year, Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act, requiring the Department of Justice to release all relevant documents within 30 days. Greene was one of the lawmakers who signed a discharge petition to force a floor vote on the bill. A discharge petition is a rare procedural move that lets members bypass committee leadership, but it usually fails because it needs backing from both parties. In this case, though, it gained momentum past the House and was ultimately signed into law by President Trump, but according to Greene, that outcome wasn't smooth. In her interview, she claimed Trump called her and was, in her words, extremely upset that she had signed the petition. She said he was furious that she supported releasing the files. When asked why he was so angry, Greene said Trump told her the release would hurt people. You can imagine how that soundbite is being used across the media landscape. News outlets are suggesting Trump is hiding something, protecting certain individuals, or trying to cover up wrongdoing. But let's slow down and look at this carefully, because the media often oversimplifies complex situations into the most dramatic version possible. First, remember the obvious: Trump still signed the transparency bill into law. If he actually wanted to stop the release, he could have vetoed it or tried to block it. Instead, after initial frustration, he backed the legislation. That doesn't look like someone orchestrating a cover-up. It looks like someone navigating a legally sensitive issue. Second, consider what hurt people might actually refer to. Trump knows the Epstein files could mention people across the political spectrum: Democrats, Republicans, business executives, foreign figures. Releasing everything without careful review could damage innocent people who were simply in the same social circles. It could interfere with ongoing investigations. It could expose private details about victims who may not want their identities made public. These are legitimate legal concerns, and Trump is fully aware of how serious such disclosures can be. Third, think practically. Trump has been under more investigations, lawsuits, and political attacks than almost any public figure in modern American history. If there were truly damaging Epstein-related evidence involving him, don't you think it would have surfaced already? His political opponents have had years and enormous resources to dig for anything they could use. The fact that the strongest connection anyone can point to is that he knew Epstein socially decades ago says a lot. Now, that doesn't mean Trump handled the situation perfectly. His anger toward Greene probably wasn't the smartest move politically, because it gave his critics an opening to imply things without proof. But let's be realistic. What we're actually seeing is someone who understands the risks of releasing sensitive legal documents without proper vetting. Once information is public, it's permanent. It can't be taken back, and the fallout can be huge. And here's the part almost everyone is overlooking. While the media is obsessing over Trump versus MTG, they're ignoring what's actually happening with the Epstein files themselves. The law Trump signed requires release within 30 days. It's early December now, the deadline is closing in fast, and the countdown is officially underway. For decades, both Democrats and Republicans have agreed that the immigration system simply doesn't work. Millions of people who are trying to come to the United States legally are stuck waiting for years, sometimes even decades, to get approved. At the same time, millions of others have crossed the border illegally and managed to remain in the country, often by having children who are born here. This creates a huge moral problem. It punishes people who try to follow the law and ends up rewarding people who ignore it. Over time, that weakens public confidence in the entire immigration system. The fact that the Supreme Court has decided to take up this case shows they know the country has reached a breaking point no matter how they rule on Trump's executive order. They uphold it or overturn it, the very act of revisiting long-standing assumptions shows that the legal and political landscape is changing fast. And here's my honest prediction. I believe we're heading toward a 5-4 ruling. I think the court may decide that birthright citizenship isn't completely automatic and that at least one parent must have some form of lawful or permanent status. I could be wrong, of course. Supreme Court decisions are never final until the gavel drops. But all the signs suggest the justices are preparing to make a major statement that brings us to something that unfolded quietly while the nation was glued to the Supreme Court. Developments, something you might have missed, but that is incredibly explosive. Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of Donald Trump's most loyal allies in Congress, appeared on 60 Minutes and revealed details of a private phone call she had with Trump. The topic of that call was the Epstein files. Before we break this down, let's set the scene. Jeffrey Epstein was a wealthy financier who died in federal custody several years ago, while facing serious charges involving trafficking and abuse. His case included allegations connecting him to well-known figures in politics, business, entertainment, and global leadership. After his death, people across the country demanded full transparency about everyone Epstein was linked to and what really happened behind the scenes. Earlier this year, Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act. This law required the Department of Justice to release all related files within 30 days. Greene supported the effort, signing a discharge petition to force a vote. A discharge petition is a rarely used congressional tool that lets members bypass committee leaders and bring a bill straight to the floor. It almost never succeeds because it needs bipartisan support, but this one did. The bill passed and President Trump signed it into law. But according to Greene, it wasn't smooth. In her interview, she said Trump called her and was, in her words, extremely angry that she had backed the petition. She claimed he was furious she supported releasing the files. When she was asked why Trump felt that way, Greene said he told her the release would hurt people. As you can imagine, the media ran wild with that quote. Headlines claimed Trump was trying to hide something, protect associates, or cover up wrongdoing. But we need to slow down and actually think this through, because the media loves taking complicated situations and twisting them into the most dramatic version possible. First, look at the full picture. Trump ultimately signed the transparency bill into law. If he wanted to block these files from being released, he could have vetoed the bill or fought it aggressively. Instead, he pushed back at first and then supported it. That doesn't look like someone hiding evidence. It looks like someone dealing with a messy legal and political situation. Second, consider what hurt people might actually mean. Trump knows these documents involve people from both parties, Democrats, Republicans, major business figures, world leaders, and others. Dumping everything without careful review could wrongly destroy reputations of people who were simply connected socially. It could interfere with active investigations. It could even expose private information about victims who wish to remain anonymous. There are real, legitimate reasons to be careful. Trump understands the consequences more than most people. Third, and this matters, Trump has been investigated more than almost any political figure in modern history. He has survived years of legal attacks, investigations, and political opponents trying to dig up anything they could. If truly damaging information about him were in the Epstein files, do you honestly think it wouldn't have leaked already? His enemies have had access to vast amounts of sensitive information for years. The fact that the only proven link is that he knew Epstein socially decades ago says a lot, Dow. Now, that doesn't mean Trump handled this situation perfectly. His initial anger toward Greene may have been a political mistake because it allowed critics to make accusations without evidence. But let's look at what's really happening. We're watching someone who understands how dangerous it can be to release large sets of sensitive documents without reviewing them first. He knows that once something is made public, you can't undo it. And the fallout can be long-lasting and irreversible. And here's what's truly interesting. While the media focuses on the tension between Trump and Greene, they're ignoring the bigger development. The law Trump signed requires the full release within 30 days. That deadline is right around the corner. We're in early December now, and time is almost up. Yes, the coming months are going to be intense. No matter how the Supreme Court rules, millions of people will be upset. When the Epstein files eventually become public, every political group will dig through them, searching for anything they can turn into a weapon. At the same time, states across the country will fight over redistricting maps. But through all of this noise, remember one thing. This is exactly how change happens in a constitutional system. It doesn't happen through sudden revolutions or force. It moves through legal battles, open debate, and the gradual evolution of institutions. Now, let's shift to what all of this means for the 2026 midterm elections. Because this is where legal decisions become political reality. If the Supreme Court's redistricting ruling is upheld, and all signs point to that it will give Republican-led states far more confidence to redraw their maps without fear of federal courts striking them down. Experts are already saying this shift alone could affect 20 to 40 House seats over the next few elections. That's massive when you realize the House usually flips because of just a handful of tight races. If Republicans gain even 20 seats through redistricting, they would have a big enough majority to pass legislation even if their party isn't fully united. It would also make it much harder for Democrats to claw back control, possibly for years. And if the Supreme Court changes birthright citizenship the way many expect, requiring at least one parent to have lawful status, the political consequences will go even deeper. Right now, children born to undocumented immigrants automatically become citizens and eventually voters. Over time, that has shaped the electorate in ways that have benefited one political party. But if that pathway is altered, the long-term demographic assumptions Democrats have counted on suddenly become unpredictable. But set politics aside for a moment, there's a larger question about national identity. Do we want our immigration system determined by whoever manages to physically enter the country? Or do we want it shaped by deliberate decisions about who we welcome? Do we want citizenship to represent a shared commitment to American values, or should it remain purely based on birthplace? These are hard questions, and reasonable people can disagree. But here's my view. A country that cannot control its borders or define who belongs to it is a country whose survival becomes uncertain. And more Americans from across the spectrum are recognizing that they're tired of being told that asking basic questions about sovereignty makes them hateful. They're tired of watching people cut the line while legal immigrants wait decades. They want leaders who treat citizenship as something meaningful and worth defending. That's why this moment, late in 2025, is so important. We're not just watching single court cases or isolated controversies. We're witnessing a major test of the core principles behind American government. We're watching courts, Congress, and the presidency decide whether they have the courage to make tough decisions in the national interest. And so far, some developments are encouraging. The Supreme Court is reconsidering long-held assumptions. Members of Congress are demanding transparency even when it's uncomfortable. A federal judge in Florida is willing to unseal documents that powerful people would rather keep hidden. Of course, none of this guarantees perfect outcomes. Courts can get things wrong. Politicians often act out of mixed motivations. Transparency can cause damage just as easily as secrecy. But overall, the direction seems to be towards stronger accountability, clearer laws, and better enforcement of the rules we claim to value. And that should give every American, no matter their political views, some confidence that the system still has the ability to function. So what should you, an everyday American trying to keep up with all of this, take away from today's discussion? First, don't let headlines decide your opinion before you know the full story. Whether it's Supreme Court decisions or leaked conversations, there is always more context. Second, understand that tension between institutions is a normal part of democracy. Branches of government fighting over power, politicians publicly disagreeing, and courts overturning older rulings are signs that democracy is alive, not collapsing. Third, recognize that transparency is complicated. Yes, we should demand openness, but we also need to respect legal processes, ongoing investigations, and victim privacy. The Epstein files not being released instantly doesn't necessarily mean a cover-up. It may simply mean the DOJ is reviewing sensitive material responsibly. And finally, stay informed. Pay attention to what the Supreme Court actually says when the decisions come out in spring and summer 2026. Look beyond the headlines. Ask yourself what these rulings mean for the future of the country and the world your children and grandchildren will inherit. Because at its core, this moment isn't just about Republicans, Democrats, or Trump. It's about whether America still has the strength, structure, and moral clarity to govern itself the way it was designed to. If today's breakdown helped you understand what's unfolding, hit the like button so more people can see what's really going on behind the headlines. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to stay ahead as the Supreme Court continues shaping America's future. Drop your thoughts in the comments too. Do you think these rulings will make the country stronger, or do they mark the start of something even bigger? I read every comment, and your perspective truly matters.